the 8th of June 2023, the day when the trailer for Persona 3 Reload was released by the poor intern running Atlas West's Instagram account, letting us know that the long-rumoured remake that everyone swore was actually happening was real, and many people, including myself, felt like diving back into the Persona games before being quickly intimidated by playing the entire 100-hour campaigns of the later games in the series. After playing Persona 5 Royal for a couple of hours and remembering that everyone in this game is so mean to me for no reason, I had a thought. What about those couple of games from the start of the series that I tried to play long ago and never got around to finishing? Those are shorter. I can play those in a normal amount of time now that I'm an adult with a job and old aging bones. And with the recent interviews revealing that Atlas might be considering remaking Persona 1 and 2, which makes me excited but also very nervous, what better time to dive in? So this led me down the path of playing through the original game in the series, Shin Megami Tensei Persona. I played through the PSP version for this video, but I did look at the PS1 version a little, and I do certainly have thoughts about the version differences, and I'll get into those as we come across them. This video will contain spoilers for the entirety of the game, and yes, I mean all of the game. I spent a very long time playing this, and my god, am I going to talk about it for an extended period of time. Now, if you're coming here knowing next to nothing about this game, but you're familiar with the later games in the series, you should know that the first two games are very different from the latter three. There's no calendar, there are no social links, and the game is a story-based, first-person dungeon crawler, and a very interesting one at that. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. I'm going to start this one out with a potentially controversial opinion. I think the opening song is fine. Like, it's okay. I don't think it's bad, and I listened to it a few times before I started skipping it when I turned on the game. It's a bop, it's a banger, yes, but the visuals are very lackluster in my opinion. Yes, it's mysterious, and yes, there's a little bit of foreshadowing, but the majority of it's just footage from the cutscenes in the game from both routes. It doesn't have the same bite that the likes of 3, FES, 4, not Golden, and 5 have, and even looking at both of the parts of Persona 2, it really doesn't stand on its own. And that's even before we consider the goatsy hands, but that's enough about those. The game proper opens with a parable from Chuangzi, who dreamt he was a butterfly, and when he awoke, he was unsure if he was a man who dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly who dreamt it was a man. But there had to be a distinction between the man and the butterfly. Our first scene in the game takes place in a dusty, crusty classroom in St. Hermelin High. Here we meet some of the party members we'll be using for the next 40 hours. There's Masao, or Mark, the guy in the hat and the dangly earring. Hidehiko, or Brown, I don't know why he's called Brown, I just learned to accept it. Ayase, the blonde ditzy girl who's part of the Kogal set, which is a Japanese fashion trend involving loose socks, long sleeves and dyed hair, which explains her outfit, but the way the game worded it, I thought she was in a gang. Ellie, who has just returned from studying abroad, and the game describes her as beautiful and intelligent, but she's honestly a complete weirdo at times, as we'll see later. Nanjo is the heir to the illustrious Nanjo group, and he acts exactly as you'd expect the rich, spoiled heir of a multi-million company to act. And finally we have Yukino, a former delinquent who is now a big sister type figure to all of the students. They're playing the Persona game, which is a ritual said to make some freaky things happen, and the group is split between those who believe and those who don't. You get to choose which side to believe, but this decision doesn't have any real implications. I don't think. Anyway, I sided with the non-believers since obviously this is all just superstitious nonsense, and we begin to play. The game involves 4 people walking the 4 walls of the room and shouting, "Persona, Persona, come here," at the corners. Certain participants are less enthusiastic than others. At the end of the ritual, nothing happens. Looks like we were right. After a little back and forth, a crying little girl appears in the room. Okay, maybe it did work. And now we get one of about 5 CG cutscenes in the game, and only about 4 characters actually get any speaking lines through the whole game. The little girl asks for help before electricity starts running through the ceiling, and 4 of the people in the room get shocked and collapse. This leads the protagonist to have a dream of a yellow butterfly, which is all taking place in the realm between consciousness and unconsciousness, which is where we meet Philemon. He gets us to state our name since it's incredibly hard to retain your sense of self in this place, and we name our character. I just chose to go with the protagonist's canon name, Naoyo Todo, since I'm incredibly basic and Philemon's really impressed with me. He goes on to explain the concept of a person having many different masks or selves within them, a persona, some might say. He makes great reference to everyone having many selves within them, and he sends us back to the real world. Here we find out everyone else had the same dream as us, and we wake up in a school infirmary listening to the absolute banger that is the school theme. The school nurse isn't very good at cooking, which I'm sure will be absolutely necessary information at some point, and Miss Sayako, everyone's favourite teacher, tells us to go to the hospital and get checked out. Not because we're crazy, but because we might be injured and the school nurse doesn't have a CAT scan machine lying around. They also tell us to visit our classmate Maki, who is staying in the hospital while we're there. Now we get to experience the gameplay a bit. These sections where your characters are in rooms where they can speak with NPCs and each other take place on an isometric grid, and the controls can get a little bit of getting used to, but it's nothing too offensive. We head out and get our first taste of the dungeon crawling. There are no encounters here, but this is how you'll make your way through the majority of the game. And oh my god, he is walking down these halls, he is stomping. And there are no audio settings for this, I checked. You'll just have to get used to it. The map screen and the mini-map are really useful tools here, and there's an option to lock the orientation of the mini-map, which some might find useful. Before leaving, we can explore around the school a little bit and run into some NPCs, like the Vice Principal Hanya that literally everyone hates. There are also some important people we'll want to talk to in order to do something later. First, we need to go to the teacher's lounge on the first floor and speak to this teacher. He'll tell us about someone coming in and out of an open room on the second floor, and we get accused of doing it with absolutely no proof. Heading up there, we run into Reiji, our final potential party member. He leaves right away without saying anything, but that's not going to put me off. I'm going to force him to participate. After this, head to class 2-1 and talk to the student there. Mark really does not like what this man has to say, huh? After leaving the school, we run into this stereotypical butler looking guy called Yamaoka, who works for Nanjo because obviously he does. Yamaoka is really excited that Nanjo has made some friends, and then gets worried when Nanjo mentions the hospital, which is fair, we didn't really give the man any context. Moving on, we enter the city map screen. This is Mikage-cho, and we can only travel along the roads here, and it's split across 6 screens. There are a lot of landmarks, like 2 shopping centres, some convenience stores, a police station, and a few agastia trees that let you save your game. There are roads out of town, but the game won't let you go beyond the city limits. Now, one other place we want to visit before the hospital is the Joy Street Mall, specifically the Yin and Yang store, since a lot of other places are closed. Here we can find Reiji's mother, who asks us about her son. We need to tell her that yes, we do know him, and yes, we will be friends with him. This furthers his quest, but we need to make sure we only talk to her once. Only once. This is a hidden sign quest from a PS1 RPG. It's going to have some weird conditions to it. Next, we need to head to the casino and talk to this blonde man, who tells us a guy with a scar on his face likes to hang around the abandoned factory in the southwest. Gee, I wonder who that could be. We head over and Reiji threatens us with death before leaving. This nut is going to be harder to crack than I thought. Finally, we can actually head to the hospital. While there, the group decides to visit Maki while waiting for their checkups, and there's also this guy who seems to be seeing fake hallways and ghost girls at his work. Well, I for one am glad you're at the hospital since you need severe psychiatric help, I fear. Anyway, Maki is in room 302, so we head upstairs and enter the room which absolutely should be room 303. A doctor is speaking with her and she doesn't seem like she's enjoying the conversation, but she picks up when she's speaking to the group. She reveals she wanted to see everyone and told Mark the last time he visited, and Yukino completely bosses the conversation and makes Maki think, yes, this was a planned visit. 0 people in this room have a suspected concussion. Maki's been having a dream about a father figure, and she hates her mum because she works at her job too much. Immediately after telling us this, she writhes in pain and gets taken to the ICU. Here we get another cutscene. A massive earthquake shakes the hospital, although there doesn't seem to be too much damage, but when the ICU doors slide open, there's a solid wall behind them. A woman screams, and the group finds a group of literal actual zombies that just climbed out of the morgue. Yamaoka is here, curled up on the ground, and we enter our first battle. The zombies attack each member in turn, and they each awaken the power within them granted by Philemon, their persona. This battle is simply introducing their powers, we don't get any control, although we do level up and get to allocate our stats. I tended to go for a balanced build with an emphasis on strength, but if you want to min-max, I would consult a guide. I am not an authority on that. Afterwards, Nanjo mourns the loss of Yamaoka after an emotional conversation, while the others discuss what the hell just happened. They call their newfound powers Persona, and after looking at the equipment screen, I realised that Mark and Yukino have brought an axe and throwing knives to a hospital. Okay, work, I guess. We can also now examine each persona we have. We can view their skills and their range, their persona arcana, type, subtype, and their strengths and weaknesses. Personas in this game don't level up, but they do increase in rank as you use them in battle, allowing them to learn new skills and increase their stats to a max of 8. Their strengths and weaknesses are also determined by their type and subtype, with element type personas being strong against element magic and weak to force, and light type being weak to dark, and so on. There are literally 28 different types of attack in this game, split between physical, guns, and magic, so there's a lot to consider here. There's also a menu in which you can arrange your party's position on the battle screen, which is very important, since every single skill and attack has an associated range. Magic skills can typically hit any position on the field, but physical skills, normal attacks, and guns have a limited range, so the position of your party members is important in determining what skills they can hit the enemy with, so it's something you should make note of since there's no point in having a character you can't make full use of. Here we enter the first proper dungeon, and also enter our first official battle. Battles are simple enough to understand. You can choose to fight, contact the demons, analyze them, change your positions, choose tactics automatically, or escape. No, escaping rarely works unless you completely outnumber the enemy, so I wouldn't rely on it. Contacting demons is something that is incredibly important, as it allows you to gain various items that are needed for Persona Fusion, something we'll get into later. However, it can be incredibly vague, confusing, and frustrating. See, each demon has several personality traits, which cause them to react differently to each communication option you have. And even if you discover an option that causes a demon to react in the way you want, it can still react differently for some random reason. It can be frustrating to get what you want when choosing randomly, so I would suggest consulting a guide. There are 4 different emotions a demon can respond with. Making a demon angry will cause them to attack you, either ambushing the party or giving a party member a debuff. Happy demons will either give you an item or gain the happy debuff. Sad demons can gain a debuff or just run away. And eager demons can either give you their spell card if your party has a high enough average level, or an item or experience otherwise. Several of these emotions can also be triggered at the same time. For example, happy and eager at the same time can get you a spell card and an item. You'll be doing this a lot throughout the game, so make sure you know what you're doing. And get used to feeling. The actual combat side of things is simple enough. Demons have strengths and weaknesses you need to watch out for, although hitting weaknesses isn't as important here as it is in the newer games. You don't get any significant advantage after hitting a weakness, just the possibility of higher damage, and even then you might have a different attack that deals more. If an enemy is weak to fire and you have an Agi skill, but your physical attack would deal more damage, then you should just go for the bigger numbers. You enter all of your party's commands at the start of the turn, and then the actions play out in order of speed. Although sometimes I noticed someone who went first last turn was suddenly going last this turn, so I don't really understand that. Party members gain experience proportional to how much they participated in the battle. So say if Nanjo just guarded all the time and Mark killed everything, Mark is going to get a large amount of experience while Nanjo will get next to nothing. Oh, also, last thing. Remember when I said there are 28 different types of attacks? This is because every single weapon type has its own element. One-handed swords are different to two-handed swords for some reason. Every type of gun is different, and each character can only equip a certain type of gun. There's quite a lot to consider, but the most important thing is that the analyze function will tell you when a demon either nulls, reflects, or absorbs an element, so just make sure you pay attention to that. Anyway, another thing you might notice is that the encounter rate is incredibly high. My first encounter in the hospital was 2 steps after leaving the lobby area, but you get used to it pretty quick. At a certain point, once you've figured out the enemies in an area, the battles go pretty quickly, and later on you can get items and spells that will prevent enemies that are lower than your level from attacking for an entire moon cycle, which is really useful. One thing that I think could have made the experience better involves the battle theme. It's a very well documented thing that a lot of people don't consider the new PSP soundtrack to be as good or as atmospheric as the original PS1 versions, and I'm inclined to agree with that, although I really do enjoy A Lone Prayer, the battle theme here. I do think it could be improved since it only has 1 verse, so it seems to loop an awful lot, so the addition of an extra verse could have really made the battle seem less repetitive. As we make our way through the hospital, it's very clear that the entire layout of the building has changed, which would be bad enough if there weren't any demons running around. It's not hard to get around at all since it's essentially a sequence of passageways with little to no branching paths, so you're not going to get lost. There are a couple of rooms along the way that have members of staff and armor pieces within which are useful. There are also mops for the people without weapons to use. It's better than nothing, I guess. Eventually we make our way to the front lobby of the hospital, and there's a nurse trapped underneath the vending machine, and Yukino asks us to help while Nanjo just wants to get out. You actually have the choice here whether to help or not, and this choice is important. It won't affect the ending since there are multiple endings, but it will affect certain events later on. There are several of these decisions in the game and I'll mention them when they come up, but generally if you answer like a good person, then you'll be alright. I try to help the lady, but zombies show up before I can, and Ellie runs in to help. She seems completely unfazed by the demons, which is concerning in many ways, but she joins the next battle and awakens her persona. She gets really intense about her new powers before being informed we can do it too. Turns out she'd played the Persona game before that day, which explains why she and the others didn't get struck by lightning. Turns out literally everywhere is infested with demons too, and the only place that's still safe is the school, so we need to head back, but not until we find Maki's mother at the local shrine. There's also no mention of the nurse lady, so I guess she died off screen or something. However, we're going to take a little detour to the Sebek building first. We can't get in because these shady guys are blocking the entrance, but we do run into Reiji, who is threatening them and just gets threatened back. Mark saves his life and doesn't even get a thank you. This certainly isn't any ordinary company. We go to the shrine next, and the entire party decides to ignore the collapsed woman and look at the admittedly exquisite butterfly. Obviously this is Philemon, and he lets us know there are a number of paths available to us now, referring to the 2 main story routes we can choose from. After Maki's mother starts groaning, we actually acknowledge her existence. Turns out she's been shot by goons from Sebek, specifically those working for Kandori. Turns out he's behind all this, and Setsuko wants to tell the police, but I don't really know what she thinks this will achieve. She hands over a security card that opens a secret entrance in the abandoned factory before passing out. Mark and Nanjo decide to go by themselves because they're dumb, leaving the rest of us to take Setsuko back to the school. On arrival, she explains everything to Miss Sayako, who was the only authority figure we have left apparently, and now we have to make sure nobody fixes the giant hole in the wall of the school. Through the next corridor we come across this comically large hole in the wall, and this is where the route split comes in. Approaching the hole makes ISA ask you if you're going through it or not, and if you choose yes, then you get locked into the Sebek route, while choosing no will allow you to pursue the alternative Snow Queen route. To start with, we'll be doing the Sebek route since that one makes the most sense to do first, and as soon as we make our choice, Maki walks out from inside the school. Aren't you supposed to be locked inside the evil hospital? And also hospitalized? She doesn't know about any of this stuff though, and her friend confirms her identity since she's carrying around her favourite compact. Her personality does seem to be completely different, but hey, at least she's walking. Suddenly Nanjo shows up and lets us know that Mark has been taken captive at the police station. I guess if they're going to take him anywhere, it makes sense to put him in jail. Nanjo has also brought literal actual guns, and now Maki is in our party suddenly. Okay, well let's go get Mark. After leaving, Maki asks us what a police station is, since the hospital has obviously been draining her life force for evil experiments to make her brain go smooth. Suddenly, a leprechaun attacks and Maki awakens to her persona, making her actually useful to Nanjo, so he lets her come along, although I doubt we had much of a choice there. Finally, we arrive at the police station, and Maki seems to remember what the place looks like. Now, why would you know what it looks like inside here? Are you a criminal? She mutters about the prison cells when you talk to her, which only furthers my suspicions. The key we need to unlock the cells in the back is in the big cupboard on the back wall that says key. The police station BGM is another banger, and the dungeon itself isn't that much more complicated than the hospital. The only thing is the encounters are a little bit harder, especially with only 3 party members. It's a straight route through with a couple of stairways, but nothing insane. At the bottom, we find Mark and Brown locked up in the cells. Mark calls Nanjo a dickweed, which is hilarious, and then some policemen show up, and according to Mark, they have that zombie stink, so they're clearly not okay. Brown joins us in this next fight, and after witnessing the horrors of combat, he also awakens to his persona, defeating the demon lieutenant. Mark will rejoin our party afterwards, but Brown will ask if he can join, and you have the choice to say yes or no. In this route, your 5th party member can be one of 4 choices. 3 if you didn't do the optional stuff we did at the start. We can use Brown in the Snow Queen route, so we'll be leaving him behind here, but be warned, if you say yes to him here, you lock yourself out of using the rest of the other characters, so be careful who you choose. Brown will literally phase out of existence when you reject him. Guess he didn't take it well. There's nothing else here, so we just leave again. Our next destination is the abandoned factory, so we can enter the Sebek building. But if you want Ellie on your team, you have to take a detour to the subway to find her. Again, we can use her in the other route, so we'll be leaving her behind. I'm sure she'll be fine. I actually decided to travel to the shops now to take a little trip to the Velvet Room. Here we meet Igor and 2 other people we don't get to talk to until Persona 2. This is where we can fuse new personas and unlock new skills. Igor has an incredibly long tutorial which you should definitely read if you want to know everything about personas and fusion. But the basics are that you need to use 2 spell cards gained through contacting demons to gain a persona. You can add an item at the end of fusion in order to increase a new persona's stats, add a new skill, or completely change the persona that's made. Each persona is assigned an arcana, and these arcana determine the compatibility of each party member with a persona, with higher compatibilities leading to quicker growth. A character can only take on a persona of an equal or lower level to their own persona level, and they cannot fuse a persona that is more than 10 levels higher than their persona level. The order of spell cards is also important, since the card in first position can lead to skills being inherited, but I never really noticed this happening. Fusion accidents are also possible on the full moon, which is the only way to obtain personas of the full arcana, but again, these are rare. I usually only attempted fusion using the guided fusion option, which tells you which personas you can make, but there's also a manual option where you can see the fusion chart, but all of these shapes and numbers overwhelm me a little bit. After selection, you get a little scene where Igor fuses the cards by calling someone on the phone and crying. I get it, I see that for him. Another little thing that Igor mentions is that you can return personas to the Velvet Room when they're at max rank, and you'll receive an item in return. I never did this because honestly I forgot, but hey, it sounds like it could be useful. Now as we actually make our way forward, if you pass by the school, you'll notice it's been covered in clouds, completely obscured. We have no idea what's happening there and we can't get in, but I'm sure it's nothing major, let's just let them deal with it. Also on the way, we visited the doctor's clinic to get healed up and his carpet says, "Love is drug," which is hilarious. At the factory itself, we run into Ayase, who lets us know that the school is actually not safe and it's literally gone now. She begs to join our party, which would be the best course of action for her, but we still say no. I'm completely dedicated to getting Reiji on our side now. Ayase reacts to rejection in a completely reasonable way in my opinion. When we rejected Brown, at least there was somewhere safe to go. And with Ellie, we didn't really know she was out there. Ayase just has to fend for herself now. Fun fact, if you don't do the prerequisites to recruit Reiji, then Ayase is forced to join your party here. so this scene lets you know if you did everything right. Also, if she doesn't join here, she's the only one of the potential party members that doesn't have an on-screen Persona Awakening in this route. Apart from if you don't see Reiji at all, of course. She's actually mandatory on the Snow Queen route, so we'll see her there. Anyway, we assume she finds a good hiding spot and uses a security card to open up the giant industrial lift that lets us into the underground passage. Because we want Reiji, we have to do this next dungeon with only 4 party members, but honestly, that's not too difficult. We'll be running into worse situations later. Navigating these shipping containers is slightly more difficult than before. There are a lot more dead ends here, but the important thing is activating all of the switches in order to open the path forward. These aren't hard to find, and they're even marked very clearly on the map, so it's barely even a puzzle. It's only 1 floor long, and then we can enter the Sepik building proper. And yet another banger awaits us. The PSP soundtrack is actually really good at the dungeon themes, it's just a completely different vibe than the PS1. Here we start to run into actual human, non-demon enemies, which means that the party is killing people. I'm unsure of the ethics of this situation, honestly. I guess it's self-defense. I did notice an increase of difficulty here, so it's the first time I actually had to grind a bit. We also get introduced to Trish, the owner of the healing spring, who can heal you for money. The price can be a bit high at this stage of the game, but eventually you don't even have to consider the price. There's also a general store here for some reason with this frog looking guy. I have no idea who this is or why they're here, but we'll buy some things anyway. Here you can take the elevator to move between floors. However, I wouldn't do what I did and go straight to the top floor, since the demons up there are a bit strong for your party. Start on the bottom floor and work your way up slowly, especially since you'll miss out on a lot of items and some dialogue with the workers if you don't. Seems like there's some ghosts running around and also apparently biological warfare. I don't remember that plot point. Also, you might get your ass handed to you. Something I think I only truly noticed at this stage is that walking around the dungeon restores your SP, but apparently it doesn't do this at the higher difficulties. Also, the shop here sells weapons for Yukino, but it's literally impossible for her to be here, so I don't know why that's there. Also, I learned that party members that are dead at the end of a battle get revived with 1 health afterwards, which certainly helps my supply of revival beads. Also, who designed this elevator? Why are the buttons laid out like this? Also, some of the treasure cupboards here are trapped, which can deal damage or even poison your protagonist, and they don't even have any items in them after that. Anyway, the path forward is found on 5F. There's a set of stairs that take you the whole way down the 1F and then go back up again, before finally reaching Kandori's office. You'll get a warning before entering since you're going to see the first proper boss fight in here. Inside is Takeda and Kandori, and here we get the first real tragedy of the PSP OST. See, Kandori doesn't get his own theme, and Kandori's theme is the basis for the leitmotif in the PS1 soundtrack, and an absolute banger in its own right. The PSP track it uses here just has no chance of holding up against that. Anyway, Kandori gets Takeda, his underling, to deal with us, but not until after Kandori reveals he has a persona as well, starting the fight with a Maragi spell, leaving us slightly hurt, but it's not really an issue if you've got some healing spells. Media is really easy to come by this stage. Takeda is joined by 4 agents who are the real problem here. Try using group and area spells for an easier time. Takeda apparently has a persona too, but it's never seen, so maybe he was lying. Anyway, it's not too difficult, and Bloody Destiny is a good boss theme, but it does have the same issue Lone Prayer does, in that there's only 1 verse, and it loops a little too much. After the fight, Takeda is nowhere to be seen, so I assume we killed him and disposed of the body. Now to follow Kandori. Maki seems to recognise him a little, but I'm sure that's nothing to worry about. Pressing the button on the desk opens the secret passage that apparently nobody saw Kandori escape through, and we enter the basement. The basement introduces us to the first dark room, which is a large patch of darkness with no visibility and no map, and it's just trial and error to get through, but at least they're not too big. There's not really much else of interest down here, apart from the stronger demons. At the end, we reach the Deva System chamber, where Kandori is arguing with some weird looking guy called Dr. Nikolai. Turns out this machine can travel between dimensions. He's already thrown a child into the dimensional rift, so clearly this man is evil beyond redemption. Kandori and the doctor enter the machine, and very soon it's made clear that something is going wrong. Nikolai has rigged the machine to reduce the people inside to their component atoms, which seems a bit extreme. Now we get a choice to either increase the output of the machine or switch it off completely. Maki knows which button is which is very suspicious, but the important thing here is that this is another one of those big decisions. Won't affect the ending though, and the right choice is to turn the machine off, so the red button. Regardless of which button you press, the machine goes haywire and a little girl dressed in black appears. She talks about her daddy before raising something into the air, seeming to cast some sort of spell. Screen flashes, and we've disappeared. When the party comes to, they're in the school gym. Turns out this gym had been torn down 6 months ago, so it's a little weird that we're in it. Someone named Yosuke has been injured, so Maki runs off to help. Mark mentions he might be the person who went missing 2 months ago. Now, while exploring the gym, I noticed this emblem on the stage, the P merged with an X looking thing, which after research I found out is called the Kai Rho, which stimulates my Kingdom Hearts brain, and led me to the obvious conclusion that all of the students in our party are Catholic. Which on reflection makes sense since the school is St. Termerlin, so obviously. On exploration, a few NPCs mention that some little girl has been attacking the school, which, okay, it's just a little girl, what could she do? In the infirmary, we run into Miss Sayako, who isn't saying much, which is really strange. Nurse Natsumi seems exactly the same though. We also run into Maki's friend Yuko, who seems to be incredibly rich and mean now, even though she was poor and timid before. In class 2-5, we come across Yosuke, who certainly has been injured a lot, and he recognizes us as people from the original world. Turns out this is like an alternate dimension, and certain places have been changed. Like the police station has become a forest, and the hospital has become a castle. Even more amazingly, the Maki we've been travelling with has been from this world, which explains her weird behaviour and her lack of knowledge of certain topics. Suddenly, the girl in black attacks, saying she's removed all of the exits. The school has now become a dungeon, and we're going to start getting random encounters. This is where I made probably the best decision of the playthrough, fusing Gozu Tenno for Mark. This persona has access to Megiddo and Megiddo-la, powerful nuclear attacks that can wipe out a large amount of demons in one hit, and this helped me breeze through a few sections, but also led to a few issues down the line. The school dungeon is a series of hallways, and as you progress through, going through the correct doors at the end of rooms, going through the wrong one will teleport you backwards. The main issue here is the increase in difficulty. A lot of the demons are a lot more powerful. Bukimi, one of the toilet demons, can cast Last Resort, which either leaves party members at 1 HP or outright kills them, which can be devastating as they usually come in groups. It did lead to my first few game overs. There's also Hanako, who can cast Ma-Eiha, causing large dark damage to all party members. They also killed me a few times, leading to my first big grinding session. A few levels higher, we come across some NPCs mentioning a girl called Chisato getting kidnapped by the girl in black. Imagine getting kidnapped by a toddler, that would be so embarrassing. On 2F, we enter a classroom to see a girl being attacked by a demon, and look who it is, Reiji is in here protecting her. We enter battle, and it turns out Reiji has already awakened to his persona. Reiji was the boy sent into the dimensional rift just before we arrived at the Deva system, and finally he joins our party. Is he worth the effort we went through to get him? Well, Reiji has high affinity for the Death Arcana, which ultimately means that he has the worst affinity with far more personas than other characters, meaning he has a lot less combat options. But where Reiji shines is contacting demons. Reiji by far has the most successful options for contact with demons. I almost exclusively used him for contact beyond this point. He didn't really contribute much beyond that, honestly. But he's exclusive to this route, so I needed to get him, so he's definitely worth it. Oh, also there's a pitfall right outside this room. Make sure you don't fall down there, like I did. Eventually we reach the school courtyard and come across the girl in black again. She's not happy, and then she makes a joke about Maki's boobs for some reason, and after insulting everyone, she recites some sort of spell, summoning Tesso to kill us all. A giant robot mouse with a giant machine gun on its back with circus music playing. An incredibly unique boss that I really enjoyed. It can use Megiddo however, so that can knock an insane amount of health from your party, so make sure you take it seriously. Afterwards the girl flees and Yosuke urges us to go to the library to meet his friend. Thankfully the school has returned to normal now, so we can head right upstairs. We're brought to this occult loving guy, Tsutomu, who we could have met in the real world before we left, but I didn't go to the library there, so this is our first time seeing this man. He tells us about this black door that has suddenly appeared, and says Philemon told him about Kandori at the shrine, so we decide to leave and try there instead. Out on the world map, everything looks a lot more brown. Also there's this giant wall splitting the town in two. That's new. One thing we can do now is head to Yin and Yang, since they actually stock weapons now, but only guns. No shop ever actually sells normal attack weapons, so we're relying on battle drops or treasure chests. Inside the shrine, Philemon will appear to us and tells us of Kandori's base on the east side of town. We need to use the subway to cross the giant wall. Unfortunately there's a demon blocking the way, so we need the expel mirror. Now nobody knows what that is, but Mark does mention it sounds like an old-timey name. A clue that lets you know it's inside the Historical Society. You won't be able to pass through the subway or even attempt to fight the boss inside without the mirror, so make sure you get it. There's nothing stopping you here, so you can just take the mirror easily. A girl's voice will ask you not to take it, and Maki mentions her image looks like Mai, who is not someone we know yet. And this makes it sound like there's a disadvantage to taking the mirror, but we literally have to, there's no choice. The subway introduces the concept of spaces that can only be travelled in one direction. If you step on these, you will be forced in a particular direction, which can move you a long distance if there are a few of these in a row. Also, this introduces probably my favourite dungeon theme in the game. What a banger. I love the synth sounds that come in as soon as the track gets into the swing of it. I only wish it didn't restart after every battle. Eventually we reach the middle room, and Yog Soggoth Jr. is terrified of the expel mirror, but they attack us anyway. This fish demon that may or may not be related to Cthulhu is weak to certain physical attacks, but does have some powerful ice spells that can freeze your party, making them unable to move for a turn. This game also has a fun feature in it that if a status effect is applied on a character that already has it, the effect can be extended, indicated by a number beside the status icon. This can be incredibly useful for your party, but devastating when an enemy makes use of it. It's not a particularly difficult fight, and Aki will appear to chastise us after its defeat. She mentions a game where we fight a cute girl and then disappears. Okay, let's move on. There's another section of the subway, but it's the same stuff again. After we get back to the world map, the only route forward is through the Black Market, the building that used to be Joy Street. Upon entering, people start to mention moles and a queen that rules this place. Also, we can't leave. Amazing. This place is kinda rusty. I don't want to stay here for too long. I haven't got my tetanus jab. The people inside the Peace Diner also make it clear that the only way to be happy here is to suck up to the queen that they're all talking about, so we decide to pay her a visit. They're really hung up on those moles here, huh? Opposite the save point is the entrance to Kama Palace. You'll need to use pitfalls to find a way forward in here, but thankfully they aren't completely hidden. Any small passageway with a door at one end has a pitfall, and there's also an elevator to help with exploration. There are a lot more branching paths now, and there are 9 floors in this place, so it's going to take a long time to find a way. After going down literally every single path before finding the actual way forward, we come across a room where one of Chisato's paintings is hanging, and this topless man is claiming it's the queen's. Our party members are taking a very long time to come to the most logical conclusion here. Apparently the painting isn't even good. In the next room, we find a treasure chest that puts the entire party's HP down to 1. Now why would the Harem Queen do this to me? At the bottom, we reach the Harem Queen's chamber, and to literally everyone's surprise, it's actually Chisato. Mark opens the conversation by bringing up the huge amount of moles on her face, which was never going to earn him any points, and as it turns out, the girl in black, who we found out was called Aki at some point, apparently gave Chisato a magic mirror that grants her every wish. She's having a great time, although every time she makes a wish, more moles appear on her face. She's very clearly being manipulated though, so we try to get her to reconsider by bringing up her injured boyfriend. But as it turns out, she never really liked him, and only went out with him to make Maki jealous. Chisato seems like a very jealous person herself, and after making Maki feel awful for doing nothing, especially considering she's not even the Maki she knows, she asks us about her paintings. Mark tells her they suck since she's rotten to the core, so she uses the same spell Aki used earlier to teleport the party out of the room, and they appear back in the Peace Diner from earlier. Yes, that's right, completely out of the entire dungeon. This means we have to go the whole way back down through the entire dungeon again. You might think we need an item or something we didn't have before, but no, we just have to go the exact same path again. I would take this opportunity to restock on healing items or get new equipment while you're up here. Hopefully this time it'll be a little easier since you should already know the path, but it's still really annoying. After a much shorter journey, we get back to Chisato, who is understandably upset. She also has more moles, which is a side effect of using her mirror. Chisato reveals one of Maki's paintings and asks if Maki's or her paintings are better. Maki's painting is lit badly, so I can't really see it, but honestly, I think that might be a deliberate decision. Mark answers even though she asks Naoya, so Chisato turns everyone except you and Maki to stone. Now this decision is another important one. Again, not an ending decider, but it will affect future events. If you want the best outcome, tell her Maki's are better. Aki shows up and tells Chisato if she beats us up, she'll fix her face, and Chisato jumps at the opportunity. I actually really enjoy the design for this boss. It's a little unsettling, but also plays on a two-faced nature Chisato has been showing us. Now if you answered the previous question like I did, you'll only have 2 party members here, but the boss will be weaker. If you chose the other option, you'll have a full party, but she'll be tougher. She casts nuclear spells and can heal herself, so depending on your weaknesses this can be tough enough, but not overly difficult. At one stage during the fight, Naoya completely healed himself, randomly back to full, and I don't really know why, and I can't find anything online, so if you know, please let me know. After the fight, Aki lets Chisato know she was never actually going to fix her face, which obviously, and leaves. Maki vows to help her after we catch Aki, revealing, yes, actually she is the better person here. For some reason, Yosuke materializes in the room, glad that Chisato's okay. Maki tries to cover for Chisato by making up some lie, but Chisato takes responsibility, and they become boyfriend-girlfriend, before the mirror shatters, reversing all of the magic, meaning the moles are gone and nobody is stone anymore. Chisato reveals that Aki lives in a castle, which, okay, of course she does, let's head over there. Thankfully there's a shortcut out of the dungeon, so we don't have to go through the whole thing on the way back. Although I guess there were a lot of pitfalls, so it's not like we could have climbed out even if we wanted to. Anyway, the castle is where the hospital was in the real world, so we head over there. Aki is waiting at the front door, telling us we can't get in without the one from the forest before running inside. There's a half-moon shaped opening on the pedestal, and Reiji tries to literally destroy the door, which sounds like an awful idea, but why not let him try? The party tries to get him to open up a bit since he's obviously hiding some secrets, but he tells them they disgust him beyond words. Anyway, the forest is on the west end of town, so we need to go back through the subway. Using the directional tiles makes this journey a lot easier than before, thankfully, but the demons in here are a lot more powerful than before, so be careful. This is a roundabout where my reliance on Megiddola started to backfire. It was my main offensive spell, but Gozu Tenno meant that Mark was weak to all element spells, and a group of 5 little guys using Ma Magnara on the party meant he went down incredibly easily. Make sure you've got a couple of offensive options at all times. The Lost Forest is in the same place as the police station was, so head north. The forest itself isn't a particularly complex dungeon. It does introduce the concept of rotating tiles, which change the direction you move forward, but they can be easily navigated by just going back in until you're facing the direction you want. There are also some directional tiles that'll move you back towards the entrance, but it's not a huge area to traverse. Our destination is a gingerbread house deep within, and inside we'll find a girl dressed in white, who is, as Mark says, the ghost from the Historical Society and also from the beginning of the game. She also looks very similar to several other characters, but we'll let the party come to that conclusion on their own. The girl, Mai, immediately starts to cry, and Maki manages to get her to talk. She describes Aki as the bad Mai, and they are not friends. Aki is a part of her personality that split from her when she met Kandori, and she took half of her compact with her. Also, Mai is the creator of this world, and she used the compact to do that, which is a lot to think about. She knows if Kandori and Aki get the other half of the compact, then they'll have all the power to themselves, but we really needed to move on, so this is going to be a tough one. Now, this next part is really important. These questions Mai asks actually do affect the ending you'll receive, so you have to answer them correctly. If you move on without a boss here, you've done it right. On the other hand, if you do fight a boss, you're on the bad ending route. Essentially, you have to be a good friend for Mai, letting her know that hiding here forever isn't going to help anyone and things won't change. After answering correctly, she'll give us her compact half. Our work here is done for now, so we need to head back to the castle. Through the subway again it is, although at least they don't get another power up this time. At the castle gate, we place the compact half into the pedestal, which promptly disappears into the ground. We played right into Kandori's hands, giving him exactly what he wanted since he couldn't get it himself. Nanjo knew this the entire time, of course, and neglected to tell anybody, but we needed to move on to get to Kandori, so there wasn't really another option. Mana Castle itself isn't overly complicated. It has some larger branching paths, including a really long one to get some treasure, and the enemies are... oh my god, the demons are horrifying. I don't like it here anymore. It does have a few floors, though with a few dark rooms as well, so it'll take a while to fully explore. There's also a treasure room, which every single chest has a trap, the majority reducing your protagonist's HP to 1. Amazing, thank you for that, Kandori. At the top of the castle, we'll find Kandori sat on his throne. Turns out, Reiji is Kandori's half-brother, explaining why he was so hell-bent on taking him down. We try to tell Aki that Kandori's not her dad, but she doesn't care at all. And Kandori decides to show us his plan. A mirror shows us the Sebek building in the real world, which explodes in a really well-animated sequence, leaving behind some sort of ziggurat temple place. He names it the Deva Yuga, and all of this was part of the plan for Kandori to become a god on Earth. And he wants to wipe out all of humanity for seemingly no reason other than he wants to. He summons Sahurva to fight us while he and Aki return to the real world. The demon quotes Sonic Adventure 2 at us, and Mark, Nanjo and Reiji start out injured after getting hurt in the cutscene. I really do appreciate cutscene damaging carrying over into combat. It doesn't make too much of a difference challenge-wise, but it is a nice touch. The boss can use earth attacks and can cause status effects on its physical hits, but its most powerful attack is Arrow Volley, which can easily defeat one of your party members, but as long as you keep on top of healing, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle. The group decides to head towards a haunted mansion, since apparently people who go there can get spirited away, and it's also in the same location as the Sebek building in the real world. I got confused as to why Mark mentioned hiding in it when he was young, since it's not in the real world, but apparently it was there before the Sebek building was built, kind of like the old gym situation. There's no shortcut here, so we have to walk out. Or I could have used one of the many emergency exits I have. Or cast Triesto, I'm near sure I had it at this point. The encounters will be good for keeping my level high. It was also around about this point I completely gave up trying to contact demons, since Mark was about 8 levels higher than everyone else due to me relying on Megiddo so much, and that threw the average levels off, and I was constantly getting refused when I asked for a spell card, so I was mostly focusing on just defeating things at this stage. The Haunted Mansion consists of a large dark room in the centre, with many paths branching off from it. There aren't really many other gimmicks to be found here, it's just dark, which isn't too hard to work your way around, just bash your head into a wall until you find a way forward. There are also rooms full of scientists here for some reason. I guess they got put here after the Deva system went berserk. At least they didn't get blown up by the Deva Yuga. On the third floor, you'll hear a woman crying through the final door. She's crying out for Maki, and Mark even notes that it sounds like Maki's mother. Must be a coincidence since Maki said she doesn't have a mother. After entering, we're faced with a giant horny lady in front of a giant plasma ball thing that might just be what we're after. Setsuko's voice has been coming from the demon Hariti and speaks directly to Maki. At this point we get another important choice, one that won't affect the ending but is still important. We can either fight or lower our weapons. The compassionate and right thing to do here is to lower your weapons. If you don't, you'll have to fight the boss. Turns out the demon was Setsuko all along. Don't ask any more questions about this, you will not be getting any answers. She doesn't know why she's there, but after explaining the situation, the dimensional portal behind her starts to collapse. Setsuko offers to stay behind to keep the portal open, although she would like it if we came back to get her after all is said and done. We can try, but no promises, lady. We arrive back in the Deva system room, where Dr. Nikolai is just kind of standing there. I'm glad he's alive, but he appears to be just a little brainwashed. Kandori appears to tell us that he's made most of the world like this, repeating his words longing for the destruction of mankind, Armageddon and annihilation. He's going to get the people to fight and defeat each other for, again, no reason other than personal satisfaction. Then he teleports away again, so we follow him. The dungeon here is a bit more tricky than before, with a lot of long, branching and twisting paths, since for those on the bad ending route, this will be the final dungeon, so be prepared and make good use of the shops at the beginning. The demons here can be quite tough also, especially the MIB demons who have no weakness, have a ton of HP and are quite strong, but not unbeatable. Just watch out for them when they show up. The interior of the dungeon is very pristine and temple-like, very regal. It's probably my favourite visuals of any dungeon. And the soundtrack here is a banger, but in my opinion, it doesn't hold a candle to the PS1 version, especially the arranged version. The vocal track just elevates it so much, really improving the atmosphere. I would really highly recommend checking it out. At one point in here, I had Reiji use a revival bead and it missed. I'm not sure if it's the position I tried to revive Mark in, but that's really weird. Also on our ascent, we come across a room that's locked. Surely there's nothing important or world-shattering in there, so let's just move on. One of the floors requires switches to be flipped before they can be passed through. When all are lit, a pitfall opens in the central room, leading to an area with a save point and a velvet room. There's a door directly across from here, and one to the east. Make sure you take the eastern route forward. The southern door leads to a pitfall that goes back near the beginning of the dungeon. Although if you just save, this isn't really much of a setback since you can just reset. But anyway, it's still annoying. Higher up there's a room with lights on the ceiling, and the floor will light up when stepped on. You need to match the pattern on the floor to the ceiling, and also make sure you're at the exit when you complete it or you'll mess it up trying to get out. Immediately after this, we catch up with Kandori and Aki. He's become depressed after realizing that after he achieves all of his goals, he'll have nothing left to live for. The party gives them their own personal reasons to live, and we get our final important decision. What are we living for? The correct answer here is to find our reason. Regardless of your answer, however, Nanjo will start ripping this man to shreds, and understandably, Kandori gets angry and attacks, asking us to prove our resolve in front of God's throne, which is an incredible line. I really wish this fight had a new boss track, but no, we've still got Bloody Destiny. Kandori can use group element skills and also has a powerful physical attack in addition to being able to give status effects. Oh, and an instant death spell. Hope you're not underleveled. He certainly does live up to what a potential final boss should be like. After taking some damage, he'll fall to his knees. His persona, Nyarlathotep, forces himself into his body, promising to give him the power he seeks. He transforms into God Kandori, a divine-looking figure with a similar image of a Buddha, and again, I really wish there was a music transition here. In this form, he retains the insta-kill attacks, but their weaknesses have changed, which thankfully added a nuclear weakness. Their physical hits are weaker too, and any dark spells Kandori used before have been replaced with light spells. Honestly, I thought this second phase was far easier, but I think my party was just better equipped for the skills he was using here. After the battle, Kandori lies on the ground, letting us know we were right all along, which we knew, and he reveals something that Nanjo seemed to also know. The other world isn't just an alternate dimension, it's a world born of the desires of the real Maki Sonomura, the ideal world that she dreamed of while hospitalized. This means the Maki we have been traveling with is the ideal version of Maki that the real girl wishes she could be. This explains why the other world reflects the image of the school from 6 months prior, why the police and the hospital aren't present since Maki wished those things weren't needed. This extends to Mai and Aki, 2 more parts of Maki's personality. The Deva system was linked to Maki somehow, and caused her power to link the dimensions to go crazy and led to the events of the game. The ideal Maki is obviously very taken aback by all this, and Kandori tells us the real Maki is here. And then he dies. Travel back to the save point and drop down that pitfall I mentioned earlier, and you'll be brought to the locked room from before, which is open now. Inside is the real Maki, the ideal Maki, and Aki. Aki is upset that we just killed her father figure, which is fair. And the ideal Maki is trying to cope with the fact that all of the suffering people have been suffering was caused by the dimension her real self's imagination produced. Her despair overcomes her and she throws herself into the chaos mirror. Mark goes to run in too, but Nanjo turns into an asshole again and tells him we should focus on destroying the Deva system, which would essentially condemn Maki to death. Mark punches him in the face and he deserves it, and suddenly he changes his mind to save Maki. Can we just leave this guy behind, please? Just before the party can jump through, the mirror shows them the core of the Deva system shattering, and just after this, the mirror itself shatters too, preventing us from going back to the ideal world. Maki left her compact on the ground behind her, but with no mirror inside of it, it's of no use to us. Reiji takes the compact from the real Maki's body, which is, okay. Thankfully there's a shard of the Chaos Mirror in the corner of the room, and it fits perfectly into the compact, which teleports the party immediately. They appear in the entrance to the Lost Forest, and Setsuko is also here for some reason. We tell her about what has happened, and she's very upset for her child. We hear Mai cry out, and Setsuko begs to come with us. Unfortunately, she doesn't join the party or anything, so we have to do this next section with only the 4 of us. At the gingerbread house, Setsuko comes face to face with Mai. She reveals that Aki has gone to see the really bad me, which means there's something even worse out there. It's called Pandora, and it has apparently swallowed Aki and is going to destroy everything. Nanjo remembers that random door from the school library, which is great since I completely forgot about it. And Mai lets us know we'll need 3 compacts, of which we have 2, and also the help of the ideal Maki to open it. Yeah, a 5th party member would be nice. Maki is deeper into the forest, so we move through the house into another section. This part is spinning tiles as well as directional tiles, some maze-like sections, but it's not very long at all. Eventually we come across Maki lying on a bed in the middle of the forest for some reason. She sits up and reveals her face has become a blank slate. She lashes out at everyone while she wallows in her feelings, and we get the decision to show some tough love or indulge in her feelings, and turns out I lied, there was one more important decision. We need to be tough with her to get her back on her feet. Nanjo rants at her for a bit, telling her if she's saying all these things then she should have the conviction to follow through on them, and when Maki gets back up, she has her face again. That's certainly some symbolism, but I'll be completely honest, I don't really understand why her face disappeared. Maki reveals there was no Setsuko in the ideal world, since the real Maki resented her for being at work all the time, but she's sorry and she loves her. Back at the gingerbread house, Maki and Mai, who are both called Maki now, which is really confusing, apologise to each other. She lets us know the real Maki has the final compact, but specifically her consciousness has it, which is deep in the Alaya cavern. We decide to leave Setsuko behind here with Mai, and she reveals probably my favourite little bit of knowledge from this game. The spell Aki and Mai used before is a phrase Setsuko taught Maki when she was younger, so that she wouldn't feel lonely at the hospital. and its true meaning is revealed when it's read backwards. This is so Ushiro Miyamariya from Umineko Goated. At the Elias Shrine, Philemon decides to speak to the party again, and lets us know that the Sea of Souls is where all souls are born and are destined to return, and it lies in the cavern beneath the shrine, and Maki is soon to return there, along with her ideal self. Only those who have been called can enter, which means only the protagonist and Maki can take part in this dungeon, so make sure you're completely prepared for this. Just because your party is smaller doesn't mean this place will take things easier on you. The demons here are just as powerful as outside, if not more so, and they will outnumber you on the regular. The actual dungeon progression isn't too complicated, there's a couple of alternate routes to get treasure and stuff, but it's not too long. I do like the face demons that represent the deadly sins here, foreshadowing for Persona 5 maybe? Also, I was about one floor from the end when I got obliterated and had to start again, that was really fun. Down on B8, we enter a room where we find this world's version of Naoya playing an arcade machine, an interesting metaphor on our character being a projection of the player. He's been watching our actions throughout the game, and this is where our moral decisions come into play. He'll show you each of the various times you made an important decision, commenting on your morality or lack thereof. At the end, he'll hand over a number of totems, allowing you to fuse your party members' ultimate personas. The number he gives you depends on your actions. If you answer every situation correctly, you'll get all 5. If you get one wrong, you'll only receive those for the protagonist and Maki. If you get 2 or more wrong, you'll get none. Now, please remember after this, you still do have an objective further on down, so please don't do what I did and teleport to the beginning of the dungeon and have to do it all over again. Anyway, at the bottom, you'll reach the Sea of Souls, where the soul of the real Maki is waiting. She's being a bit self-deprecating, which makes sense. You would have to feel like that to make a world like the one we're in now. The ideal Maki smacks some sense into her, letting her know that with her friends, she has the power to make things change. The same sentiment we told her earlier in the forest. She hands over the last compact, letting us enter Avidya World and meet Pandora. Thankfully, now we can leave since we've done everything we need to here. Once we enter the school, we find that every single door is locked, including the infirmary. There's no one here anymore, since either the real Maki is coming to her senses and letting the ideal world fade away, or Pandora's taking over and getting rid of what isn't necessary. The only people left are Chisato and Yosuke, since they're actually real. Maki uses the 3 compacts to open up the stone door, and we enter the final dungeon, Avidya World. This place is dark, decrepit, and generally unpleasant. There is a save point and healing point here at the entrance, so maybe take some time to grind up a little bit here, since the demons here are extra vicious, and it's almost inevitable you're going to die a few times here. Honestly, the worst part of this dungeon is by far the encounter rate. You'll be in combat constantly trying to navigate these twisting halls. Although once you figure out the demon's weaknesses and resistances here, they don't really pose much of a threat. Except the angel type demons, I hate those guys. Also, it's very long. Oh, it's very, very long. You run into most of the gimmicks that have been seen up until now. Giant dark rooms, pitfalls, damaged floors. It's fun, but it's just too long. In fact, I'm not even sure if I find it too long or the constant onslaught of battles make it seem so much longer than it actually is. Eventually you'll reach the end of the dungeon, the inner sanctum, the lair of Pandora, and you're met with a horrifying sight. Pandora is a horrific amalgamation of Maki's psyche. Her face appears on the end of a tendril emerging from a grotesque creature, lying in a room covered in teeth, flesh, and tongues. I can honestly say that this is one of the most horrific, grotesque, and incredible final boss designs I have ever seen, ever. And there probably isn't going to be much that will overcome that. Pandora has the core of the Deva system behind them. After about 5 seconds of attempts of persuasion, they will attack, and this fight is a huge spike in difficulty from the rest of the game. The main attack they use here is Mabu Fudain, so try not to bring anyone weak to ice. She can also paralyze and petrify you, and those effects do not go away on their own, so you'll absolutely need healing items for these effects. I also appreciate that there is actually final boss music, which yet again, is a pretty good track that absolutely does not hold a candle against the PS1 version. I have listened to that PS1 track every day since hearing it, and it makes Housework seem a lot more intense. They're also weak to most guns, so save your SP and just unload on her, since to almost no one's surprise, this fight has more than one phase. The only SP you should be spending is in order to heal. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, wow, this boss must have insane defense, they're not doing any damage at all. Well, that's because my party is around 10 levels lower than they should be at this stage. Ideally, all of your party members should be at least level 60, while all of mine were around the early 50s, if not lower. A lot of grinding is absolutely necessary before this fight. Eventually, after dealing enough damage, Pandora will recoil, and a beautiful butterfly will emerge from the horrific cocoon it dwelled in. This is where the fight gets interesting. This new and improved version of Pandora has two distinct forms. The form with pink hair resists or absorbs magic but is weak to physical attacks, while the form with blue hair is weak to magic but resists physical. It's a much better idea to approach this fight with a melee strategy, since Pandora can randomly change form at any stage during the fight, so you might set up a turn planning on only using magic, only for her to switch just before it hits, therefore healing herself. All a melee hit will do is deal a bit less damage, so it's a much less risky strategy. She also has an attack called Butterfly Storm that will obliterate your party, and if it doesn't kill, it will cause status effects, and because of my abysmal level, she easily wiped the floor with my party. So what I did was grind. A lot. Just until the point at which my protagonist and Maki could equip their ultimate persona. And then I grinded them until they were rank 8, which takes over 100 battles apparently, who knew? The reason I wanted them at rank 8 is because of Amun-Ra's final move, Hieroglyphin. This move does very strong damage to both forms of Pandora, and also works on the final boss of the Snow Queen route. Maki's ultimate persona also gave her Mediarahan, which allowed for full healing of all party members. As you can see, this grinding did wonders for my damage output, making the first phase go so much faster. However, while this made things easier, it certainly didn't make it a cakewalk. This boss is still incredibly strong, and without a proper strategy, you won't be making it out alive. One other thing Pandora can do is cast Decover, which makes that character is unable to be healed for 3 turns. Why would they put that in the game? Honestly, my favourite part of this whole thing was absolutely the boss's design. The evolution of the gross, disgusting depiction of Maki's nihilism into the serene and beautiful butterfly of hope really shows the journey that Maki's subconscious is going through and her acceptance of the future. There were a couple of close calls throughout the fight, but eventually Pandora went down for the final time. After the fight, there's a weirdly happy tune playing, and the party lets Pandora know that their friends are their power, and that her friends can be her power too if she lets them. The ideal Maki Sonomura reminds us that she's only a shadow of the true self, and she can't go back with us to the real world. The short cutscene plays. Maki kisses the protagonist on the cheek and tells him she loves him, before presumably going back into Maki's subconscious, unable to live freely as she once did. And then Philemon shows up to give us a lecture on living as our true selves in the future. Thanks, could you not have helped in that boss fight? No? Okay. He takes off his mask to reveal this whole time he has been just some guy, and then turns into golden butterflies. Wow, this game really is Zoomy Neko coded. The epilogue lets us know that the town eventually returned to normal, and the identities of the students involved were kept secret. Not that anyone would have believed them if they knew. And I also find it really hard to believe people would just forget about an incident like this. Would it just turn into a conspiracy theory people talk about on Twitter? Anyway, we skip forward to the cast graduating, and they meet up in the Peace Diner to get ready for their big trip to the amusement park. The real Maki is with the group now, and something I find really interesting is that you can see a distinct difference between the real and the ideal Maki's portrait. It wasn't just an ideal personality, but an ideal appearance she had created. The game ends with a short view into each of your party members' futures. The members you didn't take don't get anything, so we can only assume they died after achieving nothing with their lives. The only exception is the protagonist. That's for you to decide. And that wraps up the Sebek route. I really enjoyed my time with this, and I really am struggling to understand why I could never get too far in this game when I tried before. One thing I can criticise it for is the lack of characterisation beyond Maki and Chisato to an extent. Mark and Nanjo seem to be almost the exact same people at the end of the game as before, maybe just tolerating each other a little bit more. Reiji barely has any meaningful dialogue throughout the game, only adding little bits to things other characters say, which I can only assume applies to the other potential party members too. I did really enjoy the story though, but I would really like to experience it all with the original soundtrack at some point though, since I think it would change the entire vibe and feeling of certain parts of the game. But thankfully, that's not all, as you could probably tell from the remainder of the video. Oh god, why do I do this to myself? There's still the Snow Queen route, which is sometimes described as a side route, and while I understand why, it's absolutely a full campaign in its own right. It's a very different experience from the Sebek route, with another chance to use different party members and a chance to interact with the people holed up in the school. So let's take a look. The two routes begin the same way, with the split taking place after returning to the school after the hospital dungeon. However, I would highly recommend doing a bit of grinding in the hospital before leaving, for reasons we'll get into later. I would get a lot of demon cards, and I personally got the protagonist to level 15. We don't need to worry about the other party members since they'll all be leaving at the school, and when they rejoin, they'll match the protagonist's level. Also, half of them won't be joining us again, so yeah. We progress as normal until returning to the school, then we need to do some random tasks to set events into motion. First is a girl in class 2-4 talking about a curse on the school. Next, we actually have a reason to talk to this Tsutomu guy in the library, who tells us about the curse of the Snow Queen. Apparently the school traditionally does a play, where the role of the Snow Queen involves wearing a mask, and every person except one who has played this role has died. I think the school board should intervene here. Next, we go to the school gym beyond the hole in the wall and speak to every single NPC here, including Tadashi and Tamaki, members of the fencing club, which has some interesting decor. Tamaki appears to have some experience with demons, and has a rapier she used at her previous school for reasons. This is because Tamaki is actually the protagonist of Shin Megami Tensei If, a game which some deem to be the prototype to the Persona series, and also makes her one of the very few canon female protagonists in the series. Next, the student council room on the 3rd floor. The president will say some stuff about the past. I don't really know why we need this step, honestly. Next, the principal's office. The principal will tell us exactly what happened. The curse of the mask is true, and the last time it was worn was 8 years ago, by our own Miss Sayako, who obviously survived, although she did end up losing someone special to her. She mentions the mask being purified and put into storage, so obviously the next logical step is taking this object of trauma back into the light. It's in the gym storage, and upon opening it floats in front of Naoya, and it has its own special pickup jingle. Now we're locked into this route. At the big hole, we arrive just in time to see Mark leave the school with the ideal Maki. Turns out Nanjo got injured, so Mark brought him back, but then decided to leave with just the two of them. Maybe Naoya really was the brains of the party. Miss Sayako turns up and wants to go after them. Yukino says literally one thing in opposition and her mind is immediately changed. I feel like the teacher and role model of our students should have a little more conviction, even if she is right. Sayako notices the Snow Queen mask in our hands and happily takes it from us, even though it has killed countless, including her best friend. We then get the gist of the play's story, which is essentially the same as the Hans Christian Andersen classic. And then she literally puts it on her face. This clearly goes wrong because why would anything go right in this situation? The party collapses and the entire school gets covered in a layer of ice. They awake in the frozen courtyard where a possessed Miss Sayako starts to talk badly about herself and then claims that she undid the seal on the mask even though it was Naoya, but he certainly isn't speaking up about it. The mask wants to freeze everything by offering Sayako as a sacrifice and offers us a choice. We can either climb 3 towers in a school before the clock strikes 12 or wait around for fate to claim us. Philemon shows up and tells us the situation since he's so smart and knows everything. We need to reform the demon mirror and have Sayako see her reflection, and there are 12 shards hidden throughout the school. Well, he says the school, but all of them are linked to the towers and decision in making them, so they're in the towers. Ayase then reveals she's had a gun on her this entire time, and we decide to pick up a few more party members. Yukino and Ayase are required party members in this route, so I decided to check out the only other party members we hadn't seen yet, Ellie and Brian. We have to go find them to recruit them, and the school has been converted into a sort of hub area. There's a lot of closed rooms that will be slowly revealed as we progress. There aren't any random encounters here though, so don't worry. We'll have to go looking for the other 2 party members we want. Eriko is in the library to the east with Tsutomu. Turns out she can read Greek, which makes sense since she's obsessed with the occult, and what's more interesting to young people than the Greek pantheon. We also reject Tsutomu joining the party since he's not hot enough for Ayase, and I get her, I understand. Nanjo is in the infirmary if you want him, but if you want to get Brian, it's important you pick him up last, since there will be an event that levels up all of your characters here. He's in the cafeteria directly opposite the courtyard, where some kid called Toro is eating all of the rations because he's dumb, and Ayase didn't want to go out with him. Ayase deals with this with her typical delicacy and calls him ugly, and a literal demon bursts out of his chest. He says this is his persona, so maybe they just manifest in different ways for different people. Just think, in a different world, he could have been a party member. I shudder at the thought, but he couldn't have been worse than Yosuke Hanamura. Anyway, Ayase and Brian awakened at our personas, and I honestly wonder what that one student thought a teacher would have done about this. Now we can access the towers. There are 3 towers that we need to progress through that can be accessed in any order, although there's no power scaling or anything, so accessing a 3rd tower first will be incredibly difficult, but will result in higher rewards later. There's also the Devil's Peak, an optional dungeon where there's nothing but encounters, where you can grind to your heart's content without time restrictions, although it only properly opens up once you've completed at least one of the towers. I would recommend visiting the Velvet Room before entering any though, and also gearing up since you should have a lot of money from the grinding if you did it earlier. The first and easiest tower, Hypnos Tower, is located in a small room in the southeast, the former fencing club. Hypnos is the Greek god of sleep, so no prizes for guessing what we'll be running into down there. No, I don't know why it's Big Ben either. Once you enter one of the towers, you can't leave until you've reached the top and beat the boss up there, so make sure you're absolutely completely prepared beforehand. Each of these towers also has a time limit, which is enforced in different ways. Here there's a flat 2-hour time limit, although it only progresses on the map screen, not during battle or in menus. But honestly, if you're well prepared, this isn't even a factor, just something to be aware of. There are also no save points to prevent you from getting soft locked, since running out of time leads to a game over. The layout here is also simple enough, so there's literally 0 chance of getting lost if you know how to read a map. I also wouldn't bother attempting to contact any demons, since you want the experience more than anything, and you can always get them later in a Devil's Peak. I do like that in the weapon shop here, the frog child running the place actually tells you they're from Devil's Peak, whereas in a Sebic route, you're just supposed to accept their existence with no questions. Which isn't hard in a game like this, to be fair. Eventually we come across several of our friends lying on the ground asleep. Although they seem happy enough, we can't do anything for them at the moment, but we'll come back later. Then we find the principal and vice principal, and then we move on yet again. Philemon shows up and tells us about the door to the dream world since he knows everything apparently. Here we can wake up our friends and the other ones, although he notes it will take up precious time, which literally is not a concern whatsoever, unless you left the game running for 20 minutes like I did, and even then, you should absolutely take this path. Going down here lets us enter the individual dreams of each character, giving an insight into their wants and fears. Nurse Natsumi wants a boyfriend that doesn't mind that she can't cook, and her boyfriend hates her even in her dreams. Hanya dreams of being a harsh principal, and oh, she is having a nightmare of the exact same situation, while Tadashi and Tamaki just want to announce their love for each other. Unfortunately, we have to wake them all up, so pinch them and break the illusion. At the end of the dream world, we run into Kumi and her persona Hypnos. She tells us the Snow Queen has entrusted this place to her, and she's trapping people in their sleep as she believes they're happier asleep than they would be in the real world. Then we get a look at her backstory about the people around her being incredibly rude, but honestly, I get the people in the drama club. If one of the lead roles wasn't turning up to rehearsals, I would be upset too, although they did take it a bit far with the verbal onslaught. Her father is an asshole though. After the party tells Kumi they don't care about her excuses, you're given the option to pinch her. All this will do will make the boss at the end more difficult, so if you want that, by all means go ahead, otherwise you can just leave. Now we need to head back to the sleeping people, since if you complete the tower without doing this, you miss out on the rewards. Anya has a mirror shard but won't hand it over, and Ayase goes in hard. Queen, honestly. Tamaki hands over the next one and tells us she was right to trust us. I was thinking for a while why Tamaki wasn't helping us with the whole demon thing given her previous experience, but I remembered that she had a comp last time. Maybe she left it at home, I don't know, I never played if. On the 8th floor we find Kumi sleeping in the middle of a galaxy, and this room owns actually. She summons her persona and Yukino relishes in the fact now that they can attack her at full strength. Your delinquent is showing. Hypnos isn't too bad. He tries to put your party to sleep, obviously. Absorbs some elements, but he's weak to physical attacks. I do really like his design here. Him with the robe on was cool too, but I like the berries hanging out of his hair. I don't know what those are supposed to be, but I like them. After his defeat, Kumi realizes we were right all along and hands over her mirror shard. Hypnos Tower is now no longer accessible. The Devil's Peak has all the demons from there available now, and a weapon shop has opened in the school. I would highly recommend grinding for levels and demon cards at this point. There's quite a big difficulty spike between towers. Next up is Nemesis Tower, found inside the library. As soon as we enter, we're greeted by Michiko, a very well-spoken person who is very full of herself. She singles out Brown to become her pet, and he calls her ugly, which I think is uncalled for. And in response, she makes a big show of lifting the time restriction on the tower. The fact that she mentions it so much should definitely make you suspicious, since the way the time works in this tower is that the longer you take to reach the top of the tower, the stronger the boss will be. There are 3 stages, and you can tell which one you'll face by how many floors the tower has. 5 floors if you take less than 20 minutes, 6 if you take between 20 and 60 minutes, and 7 if you take over 60 minutes. Again, this time only counts for what is spent on the map screen, but even still, the dungeon doesn't have that complicated a layout. It's slightly worse than Hypnos, but it's easily doable in 20 minutes. On the 3rd floor, we reach the only real obstacle. Toro is being force-fed milk, and Tsutomu is being made to do push-ups on giant spikes. Ayase makes a great argument to move on, which boils down to I don't wanna, and Michiko shows up and says they deserve it because they're ugly. Right, okay, you're not coming across very well here. She is the key and the quickest route is to the left, but on the right she says there's a mirror shard and a hint on how to defeat the boss. Now obviously she's telling us this because she wants us to mess up. If you do pick the door on the right, there is a mirror shard, but you'll miss out on 2 later, meaning you can't get the full mirror. The ideal route is to go left, taking the quicker route to save our friends. I do agree, Ayase, they are kinda lame, but we probably should help. The 4th floor has a large dark room filled with toilet enemies which can obliterate you if you're not careful, so be wary. I managed to make it up to the 5th floor in around 15 minutes, so I got the easiest boss and finished up on the 5th floor. We fight Michiko in this room lined with faces, which is again reminding me of the Silent Hill 4 Eileen room. Turns out her power thrives on negative emotions, which is why she had that weird torture room, and now she won't be as powerful. Also, just before the fight, Ayase mentions we don't need all the mirror shards, which is a less than subtle way of letting the player know that yes, you only really need 8 shards to finish the quest, but there are 12 max and we will be getting all 12. Eventually we fight Nemesis, and this easiest form is a complete joke. They're weak to elements, and it might just be because Ayase was doing insane amounts of damage here, but they went down after about 3 turns. The only thing of interest they did was turn Naui out of stone once, and that's it. Michiko tells us all of the things she did to make people hate her and accepts 0 responsibility for any of it. So the party tells her to get lost with absolutely no sympathy for her, which, honestly, completely valid. We love a villain who doesn't get a redemption arc. Now, along with the mirror shard, we also get a piece of ambrosia. This item is why the order you do the towers in matters. If you do them in order of difficulty like I did, you'll end up with 2 pieces at the end. If you do Thanatos Tower, the hardest one first, you'll end up with 5. These are used to obtain the totems needed to fuse your party's ultimate personas, so we'll only be getting 2 of those maxed at the end. After going back to the school, we go see Toro, since Michiko never ended up handing over the key, and he gives us 2 mirror shards. With only 1 tower left, if you didn't grind the last time, I would strongly recommend doing so now. Thanatos Tower is on another level to the previous 2. Speaking of, let's enter the giant PS5 looking thing now. The time limit here is 3 hours, but there's an even bigger, more threatening gimmick to worry about here. In the first room, we meet Yuriko, who seems to be acting out some sort of idol/game show host fantasy, and tells us all we have to do to open the door is blow out one of the candles behind her. Now, the candle you choose is very important, since it determines who gets affected in this next cutscene. I picked the right candle, which meant that Yukino had her persona forcibly ripped from her body. The other candle would have affected Naoya, so I think I picked the best choice, since I'm yet again running the Megidora strategy here. This now means that Yukino cannot summon her persona at all. She can't cast spells in or out of battle, and she will go down after getting hit by literally anything. From now on, if any party members fall in battle, they'll also lose the ability of their persona, meaning you need to be really careful here. I would suggest coming in here with several people who have access to healing spells. You can easily fuse a low SP cost persona with Mediarahan using items from the casino. There is a way to get your personas back, but first we have to traverse many twisting corridors with loads of branching paths, and the high encounter rate really makes itself known here. Eventually we come across the literal entrance to the underworld, guarded by Cerberus himself. He's chill though, and he lets us go in to recover our lost persona powers, and Ellie is quite literally frothing at the mouth to go down to hell right then and there. There are quite a few things we need to do down here in Tartarus, but first we enter a mirrored room, where the party's other selves are trapped in their reflections. If we ever lose anyone else's persona, we'll have to come the whole way back to this room to recover it, so try not to let that happen again. Now, there are also 4 mirror shards we need to pick up down here, one at each edge of the map in all 4 cardinal directions, so we need to traverse this dark room to find them, and honestly, these things are nowhere near as hard to explore as I would have expected. You can tell which chests have the mirror shards in them, since they're in these giant skull things. Makes sense that the underworld decor will be this gothic. One of the chests will already be open, and Mariko, the journalist girl you see in the weapon shops, will sell it to you for 5,000 yen, which is literally less than you get after 1 battle now, so I've no idea why the game even bothered asking for it. After getting the shards, we can start actually heading to the top of the tower. Up on 6F, since nothing of interest really happens before that, Yuriko presents us with 2 chests, one with a mirror shard and one with something bad. The one on the left has the shard, and the one on the right will remove Ayase's persona. The final room is up on 7F, in a room full of skulls that doesn't really match Yuriko's personality. Yuriko tries to convince the girls of the party to die here and remain young and beautiful forever, and Ayase is having none of it, and Ellie even eggs her on after the first onslaught. Thanatos as a boss is interesting. It comes with 6 tentacles to be defeated, with half having a weakness to elements and absorbing force, while the others are weak to force and absorb element. Thanatos himself is weak to guns, fire and nuclear, so use those to your advantage. The tentacles can only use physical attacks, but Thanatos can prevent healing and persona switching, as well as instant death attacks, although thankfully this won't remove the ability to use spells. This can be difficult if Thanatos' spells keep hitting, but it gets easier as the amount of tentacles decreases. When it's almost dead, Thanatos will become a floating eyeball and just cast Hell Eyes, another instant death attack, and it gets really annoying at this stage, but the fight's almost over, so it should be smooth sailing from here. After the fight, Yuriko actually seems happy to be defeated, probably the only person to come out of the situation happy, letting us into her mind and relaying the very real and honest fears she had for her future. With that, we collect the final mirror shard. Now we can finally save Miss Sayako. Holding up the mirror removes the mask from Sayako's face, revealing a spirit with a half-frozen face to be possessing it. Now we have to fight Lady Masquerade, a giant version of the original mask. Obviously ice attacks are going to be useless here, so try not to do what I did and bring only ice-based personas for ISA. This boss can hit hard and is a much higher level than Thanatos was. High level ice and gravity magic, attack buffs, powerful physical hits and several debuffs can make this a hard fight to win. I actually only won this since I brought about 1,000,000 revival beads and I was constantly reviving since I was doing next to no damage most of the time. Afterwards, Miss Sayako is completely fine and she reveals the spirit possessing the mask was her best friend Tomomi from back in Drama Club. A flashback reveals that Sayako didn't want the part of the Snow Queen, meaning it went to Tomomi instead. Whether this was fear of the curse or consideration from her friend is unclear, but the result is Tomomi's disfiguration and ultimate death. After talking Sayako down, we realize we beat the boss, but the entire place is still frozen. What gives? The Night Queen, Tomomi's persona, appears with an incredible design I might add, and reveals without her human host, she's free to pursue the eternal night once again. Great. Tomomi appears and transforms the mirror into the Spiegel's shield, the ultimate armor for the protagonist and our reward for collecting all 12 mirror shards. There's also a full set of armor in the storage room, but that's deep into the final dungeon, so we'll come across that later. Now we're on the home stretch, only one dungeon to go, and it's a biggie. First things first, go grind. This is the final dungeon, and by most accounts it's far more difficult than Avidya World, so you should really be high in level at this stage. The entrance to the dungeon is that one closed off room to the south. Make sure to talk to Nanjo here and he'll give you a Furba dagger. I already had one, so Ellie gets to use the good sword now. I'm not sure if it's always Nanjo that gives you this or whoever you didn't choose for the party, but talk to them all anyway. They usually have something interesting to say. Or something completely uninteresting, but you should talk to your friends, that's a nice thing to do. Now we're inside the depths of the ice castle, and oh my god, this place is huge and complicated, although thankfully there isn't any time limit here. This first floor is full of directional tiles that force you down a particular path, with only one route that actually goes to the next floor. There are a couple of treasure rooms here you'll want to check out though. The next floor is full of long, twisting corridors with classrooms to explore, although most of them don't have anything in them. We do find the gym storage room with some frozen students, and talking to the party here lets us know there's a piece of paper in front of one of the frozen girls, which then lets us know the hero's costume from the Snow Queen play is beside the vault, which gives us the rest of the Spiegel set for Naoya, which I don't think was as good as what he already had on honestly, but hey, we earned it, so we're gonna take it. 4F is more of the same, and at the end we come across these student Jack Frosts we met outside the Devil's Peak. If we agree to be their friends, then they teleport us up to 5F. Now, this floor. This damn floor. I spent literal hours running around this labyrinth of a section. You have to go up and down staircases. There are so many branching paths, and the fact that they stretch across 3 floors means it's a lot harder to read on a map where you've been and have yet to go. Some of these staircases go up and down, adding even more options. This is the first time in the game I had to resort to a walkthrough to find out where I had to go. I was just that confused. There are various classrooms throughout that have characters from the Sevik route though, such as Aki looking for Kandori and teleporting out when he's not there, and Mai looking for Maki. They both mention having masks on. Seeing a theme here. Eventually we do come across Maki, but she seems to be a nihilistic version of Maki that wishes for destruction of the school and everyone in it. So maybe this is the opposite side of the coin to the ideal Maki, but not quite the real Maki. The not ideal Maki. Unideal. Google is telling me that's a word, but I don't know if I believe that. Anyway, I'm pretty sure all of these scenes are optional, but they're nice to break up the tedium of exploring this hellscape. Eventually, after literal hours of wandering, we reach a light puzzle, almost identical to the one in the Deva Yuga all those hours ago, solved in the same way. Here is the gym stage, where we find the Night Queen waiting for us. Maki and Kandori appear before we can fight, and reveal that this isn't even the end, there's more dungeon. Oh lord, I hate this place. Kandori takes us to another classroom and offers to teleport us back to either the stage we just left, the room on 5F with the Jack Frosts, or the beginning of the entire dungeon. Thankfully up here there's a healing fountain, save point and a velvet room, so you only really need to go back down if you're running low on healing items or you have horrible armor or something. There are a lot of damage floors up here, so be careful, they can really rip through your health if you walk in too many in a row. Compared to the last section, the rest of the dungeon is simple. The next floor has 2 dark rooms to stumble through, and then it's a simple stroll to the final boss room. Here we're met with Queen Asura, who has merged her powers with the Maki and Kandori we saw. She attacks immediately. Her theme is an absolute banger and, well, you can see what happened here. Asura can use almost any element attack in the game, and if any of your characters are weak to it, then they're pretty much goners. I went here with characters in the 50s, but you absolutely need to be in the 60s to even have half a chance at winning. I did try and salvage the run, but it was pretty clear I wasn't winning here. She is far tougher than Pandora was. One thing I was wondering at this point was, hang on, what about all this ambrosia I got? How do I get my ultimate personas? Well, turns out I just walked past the area to get those. The Jack Frosts are in a room on 3F of the Ice Castle. Talk to them to get the totems you need. Apparently I didn't even record this part, so yeah, just use your imagination here. Then I grinded up to the level I'd need to equip the personas, and then got them to rank 8 for Hieroglyphin since it works so well for Pandora. And turns out you need to use 100 skills to rank a persona from 7 to 8 if their level is within 10 of yours. So yeah, that took a long time. I decided to go for the protagonist and Brown's personas since I only had the 2 Ambrosias, and Brown had the lowest level needed to equip his, so it was a no-brainer there. The second attempt started off a lot better than last time. Asura has a similar gimmick to Pandora's second form, in that she has 3 forms she can take depending on which of the 3 heads is facing the party, each with their own skills, strengths and weaknesses. Thankfully they never absorb anything, but one form is weak to physical hits, another guns, and the last is element and force. The fight went fine for a while. Yes, I was getting my ass handed to me, but not as much as before, and I was getting good damage in, until something interesting happened. Asura got a few good hits in and knocked out the protagonist, but then they revived themselves to full health mid-turn, and when their next turn came around, their persona had reverted to rank 1. I assumed this was some sort of weird status effect, so I tried every single healing item I had to try and reverse it, and no amount of using skills brought their rank up again. As it turns out, this is an effect known as an unknown power, and this has a 25% chance of activating on a certain phase of the moon, depending on the demons used to fuse the persona, and this also prevents the persona from ranking up again until after a fight, which meant I had lost my ace in the hole, just because of the phase of the moon. I have never been more upset in my life to be revived for free. This slowed down the pace of the battle significantly, since I went from doing around 600 damage per turn to about 200. There were several times throughout that I was convinced it was over, and I'd have to start again, although honestly that probably would have been easier, but after about 30 minutes of pure stubbornness, I finally took her down. We get the standard speech that as long as despair exists, the eternal night will always eventually fall, and the school defrosts and returns to normal. The story ends with the party at the front door of the school, ready to go out and help Mark and Mackie since we haven't dealt with the core conflict of the game yet, and the students step towards their future, but not until after they deal with the Deva system and all that. And that's the Snow Queen route. I like that there was an alternative route at all. It's nice to experience the story in a different way, with a less linear progression, and also it gave Yukino and the ISA a little more spotlight, although Ellie and Brian still feel like they got left behind a bit. Also, this was way harder than the Sebek route. I feel like I only did one big grind there, but this route had me doing it 3 or 4 times. I do think if you're going to play this game, maybe take a break between the 2 routes, and definitely do this one last. I feel completely burnt out on this game now after all that grinding and dungeon crawling. Oh, also, there's a post-credit scene where Mark meets up with the party since Maki got eviscerated by some demons, leading us straight into the events of the Sephiroth. Meaning technically all of this could be canon, and probably is. I don't really know what happens in Persona 2. One day I'll finally play those games. And that was Persona PSP. Although there's one more thing I want to check out. That's right, we're doing a quick, and I mean quick, look at Revelations Persona. I only played from the very beginning to the return to the school since I couldn't physically make myself play anymore, but I wanted to see the differences for myself. First, the opening is a lot more subdued here. There's no J-pop tune, it's just a soft piano over various people and places in the story. And honestly, I much prefer this. I think it does a much better job of setting the tone for the journey ahead. There's a nice piece of symbolism with the building blocks representing the school, and the clock tower falling to show the trauma that is to come. Although I do have to question why this high school age student is playing with blocks. The real changes come in the game itself, which honestly doesn't look that much worse than the remake, and oh god, that's different. Yeah, this game came out at a time where Americanization of games and anime was at its peak, and companies decided the general public didn't want to play as Japanese people for some reason, so they changed most of these characters' designs and names. Ayase, or Alana, really gave me a white woman jump scare when I first saw her. You also really notice a change in atmosphere with the music. It makes this identical scene seem so much more mysterious and intriguing than before. The truly worst part, though, was the protagonist's design. Dear god, what were they thinking? At least the UI is cool. I do appreciate here that Ellie makes it clear that she and some of the others had played a Persona game before, making it a little more obvious why they didn't get knocked out when Mai appeared. Also, Philemon looks really goofy here, he kinda reminds me of Buzz Lightyear a bit. That sound you make when you're walking around in the dungeons? Vile. Sounds like we're walking in flip-flops that are a couple of sizes too big. Also, as far as I could tell, there was no way to speed up your movement either, so you're stuck slow walking. Now, my main issue with this version absolutely has to be the world map. I know I'm criticizing a game released in 1996 that's almost as old as I am, but this is awful. I found it hard to tell where I could cross the roads, since you had to walk down the middle of the crossings, and it just seems so much bigger than the PSP version. Although that probably comes down to the lack of separate screens for each area. When we reach Maki's hospital room, she's apparently being treated for minor mental delusions, and I don't remember the PSP version giving her a specific illness, so I appreciate the attempt to link her hospitalization to the events of the game. The next sequence plays out identically, except without the anime cutscene. After the Persona Awakening fight, we get to change our party layout, and honestly I think this screen does a much better job of showing the restrictions on party position than the remake did. Back then I had no idea what I could and couldn't do, but here the diamonds illustrate it a lot better. As soon as we enter a real battle, I am really struck by how much I actually prefer this battle theme to Lone Prayer. Although the lack of ability to speed up battles, and the protagonist's questionable pronunciation of Persona really made them drag a lot, and I really do not think I could play the entire game like this. Speaking of, because of the battle length, it literally took me half an hour to get back to the school, and it was at this stage I finally gave up. I was only originally going to play a little anyway, but I truthfully did not think I would only last that long. But I did much prefer the atmosphere this version had, with the music and the visuals, apart from the Americanizations obviously. I truly think a hybrid of this with the PSP's quality of life changes would have been a much superior product. Overall, I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in the history of the Persona series, definitely consider giving this game a go. Although I'd hope after watching, you won't go in expecting social links or school days, but rather a solid dungeon crawler with a complex and interesting battle system, two distinct story routes with their own gameplay loops. I'm really glad I gave this game another go, and if I manage to convince anyone else to revisit it, I consider this a job well done. I was actually about halfway through this script when I started thinking about whether I was saying anything actually worth talking about, and honestly that rather got me in the dumps a bit. But then I realised even if one person watches this, and it reignites a little interest in the games I covered, then it'll all be worth it. So I'll most likely be talking complete rubbish about games for the next while. Anyway, if you watched this far into the video, I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like, comment, or subscribe. It really helps to inflate my ego. And with that, that's all from me for today. Tune in next time for something else. Hopefully something smaller this time. Goodbye.